So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased as punch. Um, so our guest is a actor, teacher. He is a union advocate. Welcome, Shaan Sharma. Welcome to the Roundtable. So glad to
Thank
have
you
you
very
here.
much. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. And please, anybody who wants to bring up anything or ask any questions, I hope this can feel very comfortable and safe and informal for you to ask whatever questions you have, no matter how tough or controversial or sensitive or whatever you want. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So let's start. Let's start with the less heavy stuff. Do you come from an artistic background? Was there art in your house? Were your parents performers or any kind?
No, my dad was an electrical engineer with a dream of being a performer. He used to record home movies in our basement where he would splice video of himself singing and dancing along with Bollywood movies in kind of an odd but and kind of sad, kind of like expression of his lost dream of being a Bollywood actor. One of his sisters was an actress and producer in Bollywood, and so was a niece of his. But yeah, my dad was shoved down the traditional track of being an engineer, and then went to Germany, where he worked for 5 years and got a visa to come to Minnesota for 30 days to try to find a job, and he got a job for Honeywell in Minnesota. And then a couple years later, he was compelled by his family to go back to India and marry my mom at force, like arranged marriage. And then I came along, and my mom was also college educated in computer science, funny enough, but she doesn't know the first thing about computers today. So whatever computer science was in the 70s, that's what was her.
The Commodore 64 is like where it ended for her.
So, but it was pretty clear early on I was artistically inclined, both musically and performance and all that. So I didn't really switch to focusing on acting. It was kind of introduced to me by a mentor after when I was just after trying to graduate junior high school. But yeah, it was something that I had to kind of forge my own path as the black sheep of the Indian community in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
When did you make the move to LA?
I came out into the great unknown, and it was my girlfriend and I that moved out in the summer of 2007. Immediately, I joined SAG at the time. I went to the LA Los Angeles Conservatory, and they had something called a summer intensive where you can go to a free weekend of workshops and all that. That's where I found my first acting teacher, Karen Austin, who I love to this day and is one of my dearest friends. And now we're working together on all kinds of fun stuff for the union. Funny enough, one of the most successful commercial casting directors in LA, a guy named Joe Blake Casting. So I started working. I had a meeting with Joe. He said, "You want to run sessions for me?" I said, "Sure. What's that?" And 2 weeks later, I was running commercial sessions for commercial casting directors in town, and I did that for 10 years with about 45 of the top commercial casting directors in town, running sessions every day, coaching people in the room on how to give the performances our clients were looking for, running the callbacks, all that stuff. And then it's a very flexible job, so I could have people cover me to go hit my own auditions and do my own thing as well. It was really a blessing. Not many people are well constituted to run sessions or know that it's even an option or have the in to be able to do it. But to make $300 in just playing with actors all day long and still be able to act and all that, not a bad deal. And so yeah, it was, but just to kind of hone in on what you were asking, coming out here, I made the same mistake almost every actor makes when they try to pursue the industry, which is I got to get an agent, I got to go on auditions before asking, am I even qualified? Am I even ready to step into the ring right now? And because what we do is so subjective, although it's really, we all know what professional standards of performance really look like, but some people can kind of accident their way into a job or are in the right place at the right time, or whatever role is presented to them is so them that doesn't really take much other than listening and responding, and they get to kind of grow up on set and learn as they do it. Those types of opportunities are so few and far between. They're kind of newsworthy when they happen, but it still feeds into the same mentality I saw in the music community of people thinking if they just play these dead end gigs that someone's just going to discover them, as opposed to really honing their craft and really building an audience and all of that. So when I came out here, within 60 days, I had great rep, agent, manager. I was going on auditions. I was doing casting director workshops, and I wasn't ready for any of that. What I should have done is get my ass in a better class. Not that Karen's class wasn't good, but it was teaching something I didn't need to learn. I needed to learn how to adapt my craft for the on-camera genres of drama, single and multi-camera comedy, and also commercial auditions. And so I was a good actor, but I wasn't a great or a brilliant actor. And so I was sometimes called back. I was on a veil a couple of times, but I wasn't consistently booking. And it wasn't until I really humbled myself in 2010 and went back to the drawing board and got my butt into another class that was specifically focused on camera technique, that I finally started to move forward. And then I really became a working actor around 2013. And since then, it's been a blessing. But it took me 6 years to get my head on straight and get going. It took a long time for me to understand what my job was. And my job was to focus on the story and not to focus on booking, not to focus on the business. It's one of those, chicken or egg things where it's like, well, if I don't focus on the business, how am I going to work? But I won't work if I'm not good at the storytelling. But you really have to, from my experience anyway, in the way that I teach and the way that I, now at the Los Angeles Conservatory, I'm the co-chair. I help lead education for our entire 82,000, SAG-AFTRA membership in Los Angeles. And it's really about focusing on serving the writing, the genre, the tone, and the writing style, and making sure that you can adapt your craft to those specific things. And that, there was something that the union did that SAG-AFTRA put out a couple of days ago that I really disagreed with. And as I continue to grow in my influence within the leadership landscape, I'm going to try to drive that kind of thought process out of the union. And what it was is there was an actor fund and SAG-AFTRA joint event about dealing with rejection. And I totally understand the mindset that thinks about not booking something as rejection. But from my experience in casting, and I think, Brian, you and I might see this similarly, is that only one person can be given the job. So for the 9 or 10 or 20 other performers who came in and did a wonderful job, for them to feel like they were rejected is just not an accurate reflection of what our intentions were. Our job is to bring some wonderful options to the clients for their final decision making. And if we've done our job well, it'll be a hard decision. They'll be like, wow, well, we could go this way, we could go that way. We really like this, but what about that? And so it's like, if we do our job well, we provided them with an embarrassment of riches. And so for the fact, just the simple fact that rejection would be if I could hire all 20 and I decided to reject someone and said, no, I'm not hiring you. But in our job, we have to select someone. Despite all of the wonderful options, we have to select one. And so Bryan Cranston did this wonderful advice for actors video on YouTube you can find, where he said, essentially, I'm not going there to get a job. Like the reasons why someone may or may not book something are so out of your control, it makes no sense to hold on to that. You're not being rejected. It's just, I'm going to go in and show what I do and walk away, and I'll be right for some things and I won't be right for others. And it's so hard for performers, especially when we've put so much on the line, to come out here and not see not booking something as a reflection on us, as opposed to part of the process. But I think I'm really grateful that I got a job in casting when I moved out here initially, because it helped me put things in proper perspective, where I could see that the conversations clients and casting directors were having about actors was not at all about rejecting them, and everything about selecting great ones that we wanted to move forward. One of the things that I have really come to understand is how out of our power our community is. And because we're out, and we're even out of power within our own union, I constantly meet performers who are like, I don't know what the union is doing for me. I don't seem to be getting much for my dues money. I never hear anything. There's no opportunities. They're not helping me with my boots on the ground kind of issues. A lot of the issues that we see that are being fought over only apply to the highest earners. It's like, and that people are even afraid to speak up because they don't want to be retaliated against by their own within their union. And if we have that feeling within our union, imagine how we feel when we go on set. And now, how are we supposed to stand up for ourselves on set or out there in the world if we can't even feel like we have that, that strength within our own union? So I just constantly see performers out of their power. And I think that an educational message that says, let's all talk about how to cope with rejection, feeds into that fear-based narrative, as opposed to talking about, let's talk about how to uplift each other and vibrate at a high frequency so that we can persevere through the natural fluctuations of someone's career and still be fulfilled and find community and make sure people are surrounded with the kind of energy that keeps them consistent. Because one of the things that I've started really educating about in the last couple of years is the idea of consistency, about how there's kind of a spectrum of function, and the fact that on one end are people who can't get out of bed in the morning, and on the other end are people who are so perfect they're like robots, and neither one of us on this are at the extremes of that. But beyond a certain threshold, someone is off and on, right? Like sometimes they have a good day, they got rest, they somehow managed to find a rehearsal partner, they put their time in, they connected with the piece, whatever their excuse is, but they happen to do a good job in this audition, but their next one, they didn't do that well, and the next one. So it's like inconsistent. And then beyond another threshold is where people do what it takes to make sure every time I show up, I bring my A game. And those are the kinds of people that I see, working consistently, are the ones that are functioning at a high level, that aren't perfect. There's still things that happen, but at least I know when I call this person in that they're going to show up having brought a wonderful option to the table. And that's something I can really rely on. So that's the kind of culture I want to establish within the union, is one that focuses on keeping each other consistent and uplifting each other.
What was that process like of getting more active in the union, becoming an LA local board member? Like,
really random story. So, from working in casting, I got approached in around 2008-ish by some of those casting director workshop facilities who saw me working for some of the top commercial casting directors. And so they said, hey, we'd love to have you come teach like a commercial audition technique class for us or something. And I'm like, fine, great. So I thought I wasn't qualified as an actor at that point to teach, but as far as sharing what I've learned from working in casting, I'm happy to share what I see working for people in the room. So I started doing these kind of commercial audition technique classes, and then that evolved into around 2012-ish, something like that. I had a pamphlet that I wrote to kind of keep all of my thoughts in order. So I decided to put it into an actual book called Commercial Acting in LA, a Session Director's Guide. And I wrote it and I self-published it on Amazon and a bunch of other online distribution platforms. And I put out a press release about it, and Backstage picked it up and reviewed it, and they invited me to start writing for them. So I've written at this point about 50 advice articles for actors on Backstage. One of them that I wrote was about the fact that I had auditioned for a union campaign for the NFL Network, 8 spots running all football season, whatever. And 2 days after I auditioned for it, when they wanted to book me, they said, well, we turned it to a non-union production, but we still want to hire you. We're willing to offer you more money if you're willing to do this for us non-union. And I said, nope, I don't do non-union. My union saved my career with a back surgery that I needed since I was 19. When I qualified for SAG-AFTRA health insurance, SAG health insurance at the time. And so I said, no, if they want me, turn it back to a union production. Otherwise, I got to walk away. Well, 4 hours went by and they changed it back to union just to hire me. And we did the whole campaign and all this stuff. And it was very visible and it was an awesome spot. But, from working in commercial casting, you realize if you can get the ad agency, the director, the client, everybody to agree on a first choice, they do not want to recast and go back to the drawing board. So you kind of have them at that point. So I'm like, you have to know we have the power. And so I said, stand up for your union. And it was read by the national executive director of our union at the time, who's just about to retire, a guy named David White. So he read my article, invited me into some meetings. From those meetings, I got invited to teach in the LA local conservatory. So I started teaching at the conservatory in 2015. By 2016, they'd invited me to be on the committee that governs the conservatory. That fall, I was put in charge of the commercial department. 6 months later, I was asked to run for the board. 6 months later, I was on the board of directors. And then 6 months after that, I was put in charge of the entire curriculum for the conservatory. And now, all these years later, I'm the co-chair of the LA Conservatory, as well as on 4 other committees. I'm on the local board of directors for SAG-AFTRA. I serve at the national level, and I have a grassroots SAG-AFTRA educational group. And so suffice to say, I'm about as involved as one member can be in SAG-AFTRA volunteerism.
When did you start discovering all of those aspects of the union that shocked you?
When did I start to discover it? It was immediate. And I would say that the way that I would describe it is, if you were to stick your finger into a socket and get shocked, I feel like I stuck my finger into the socket and I got shocked, and then I continued to be shocked. And at some point I started to acclimate to the shock. And now it feeds me, and I'm like getting empowered by the stuff that I find so shocking. It's like a battery. It's like a source of energy for me, because what I've come to understand is that there is so much potential for this union that is unrealized. You know, when you come in, you think like, why isn't it this way? Or why don't they do this? Or why are they doing that? And then as you really start to understand how the union works, you understand we could do this. We could totally do that. Why aren't we doing this? But it's a completely different perspective. Now, whether it's joyful or whether it's tortured, when somebody says, hey, why aren't we doing this, or we could do that, for those who are in power, who are responsible for the status quo, some of them don't take kindly to critique or for any feedback that makes it look like they didn't know what they were doing, or that they may have been misguided, or that their efforts were not successful. So there's kind of what's the incentive of the ruling regime to admit that things have not gone well underneath their leadership? It's always somebody else's fault. It's always technology's fault, or the marketplace's fault, or the studios and networks' fault, or, you know, whatever, you know, the economy of the United States, or the lack of universal health care. I mean, there's no lack of excuses we can make, but part of the reason we join a union is to have a community to fight against all of those different forces, not to surrender to them and to use those as blanket excuses. So my first taste of the dysfunction was in the conservatory committee itself, because I came in as an educator, and when I was invited to join the conservatory committee, and I saw it was completely not serving its purpose. The program manager in charge of the conservatory was more off casting the AFI student films than focusing on creating programming for our members. She hated her job. She was so disrespectful to the committee members that she didn't agree with. And then we had a committee that was basically an old boys and old girls club that just liked the title, liked to look big in front of the people who came into the classes. They hooked their friends up with teaching there, who would just use it to poach people into their private studios. You would drive all the way across town only to be sold on why you should join some class, not actually taught something useful. The conservatory of the Los Angeles local was a joke. It was a laughing stock. You ask most people who are SAG-AFTRA members, what do you think of the LA Conservatory? They're like, what LA Conservatory? Or they were like, you know, like, oh, that thing? Yeah, I went to one thing, and it's really for people who are green or background performers who are just getting into it, or people who can't afford real classes or whatever. It had such a terrible reputation. There wasn't a single class that they were offering with prepared material. It was all cold reading. It was all, you know, just so for me coming in, I was like, okay, from working in casting, I can see we need to have a actual state-of-the-art camera studio. The studio they had was just like out of the 70s and so we updated it, you know, painted the room, invested $20,000 in brand new equipment. We developed a whole robust curriculum of classes that were missing with qualified instructors, and we prohibited pitching your own private stuff during class time, and just instituted all these reforms. Then when I started bringing that energy into the conservatory, the ones who had been in charge of the conservatory took that very personal, because they had been responsible for that, and they saw that what I was doing was showing their ineptitude. And it led to a huge confrontation where in a meeting at the union headquarters, they took my entire curriculum, erased all of my teachers on it, put themselves and their friends on it, and presented it to the staff as if it was their own idea. And then they didn't know that the staff had already been working with me to establish what I had written. So they looked like complete frauds. And it led to the co-chair of the conservatory resigning at the time. And something like 10 or 11 of the committee members resigned over the next year, because they were just not in sync with us trying to professionalize this conservatory. So my very first experience in volunteerism was challenging the status quo to make things better. And I was successful over the course of a 2-year span. And now the LA Locals Conservatory is like its pride and joy. Prior to COVID hitting, we had 3,000 members and 40 classes a month with qualified instructors, and doing free self-taping for members, and doing table reads with the Writers Guild and the Blacklist and Coverfly, and just really enriching people's lives and professionalizing it. And so right away I realized that that there was room for improvement. And so I was able to be part of the transformation of the conservatory committee, but that's one of 34 committees in LA. Then when I got in the boardroom, I started to see the problems that we faced as a local, as the Los Angeles local. And then from serving in the local, I started to see the national issues that we're facing. And so I would say that my first 2 years were devoted to fixing the conservatory. My next 2 years were devoted to fixing the LA local. And my next 2 years are going to be about fixing the union as a whole. Now, can I personally fix it? No, but I mean, my energy contributing towards that collective effort to try to make things better. And since I've been, greeted with resistance at every stage of this, I'm acclimated to it. Like, you can't hurt my feelings. It's like, debate me on the issues, on the idea. Let me know if I am boneheaded and I have a stupid idea that doesn't work, but calling me names isn't going to change anything. It's not going to dissuade me. I'm an Indian American from white Minnesota with the only Indian in my high school and junior high. You can't hurt my feelings. You can only delay the inevitable conversation, So,
Right.
so for me, it's been just pushing through resistance and it melting out of my way just by focusing on hard work and perseverance and consensus building and providing value to those around me, to the point where it just doesn't make sense to resist it after a while.
So I got a question. It's a two-parter. Okay. So let's start with the first part. What, in your mind, what are the top 3 issues confronting the union? Like 3 opportunities for significant change as you see it.
I love that, because I've got a 9.5-page list of the things that we need to do. But if I were to say top 3, I think the first one would be technology. The fact that we have for-profit companies, 3 large ones, that create a paywall between us and access to work is probably illegal in the state of California, but it's also just immoral that our union hasn't developed iActor as a platform that is free for our members to use, to be able to have their online casting profiles be submitted for jobs by their representation, and for the union to track all of that data to make sure no contract violations are taking place and the people are being submitted appropriately. But the idea that we have to spend over $600 a year, triple our base dues as a union member, to be part of Actors Access, Casting Frontier, Casting Networks, and God knows what other else we have to pay for, whether you're paying for IMDb Pro or whether you're paying for, Cast It or, Casting Workbook or whatever other those different types of apps there are. To me, Actors Equity has its own hiring platform built in that's free for its members. The Writers Guild has a whole hiring platform it used to say, fuck you to the agents over the last couple of years. And so why are we okay with letting our members have their access to employment be controlled by third-party for-profit companies, especially those that the union has absolutely no data sharing agreement with, no way to protect our private data and information, no way to track whether people are being improperly submitted or paid or booked or whatever the case may be. That to me is such an obvious neglect of the changing times and of the technology. And that kind of thinking has also put us behind in our rates for streaming content, whether it's, we have shows that have budgets as high as $300 million for Apple or Amazon, whatever, paying their stars millions of dollars per episode and paying scale to the rest of the performers. And then their residuals are a fraction of what they would be on network television because of the absurd formulas that were negotiated. And so if I would say technology is one of the most immediate ways people would feel value from their union, is that savings of those hundreds of dollars a year and support actually having access to employment. So that would be one major fix that we would need to do. The next thing that I feel like we need to do is we need to drive out the toxic partisanship that is in our union. Our union is completely traumatized and divided by warring factions that are controlled by the same people that have been in power for about 20, 25 years. Now, if you think of any political party, there are going to be those who are like the foot soldiers and the friends who kind of get brought along, but they're all kind of led by a handful at the top. So many of the people on these different political parties are wonderful people who have no idea what they've gotten into, and they have no desire to contribute to infighting within the union. But they were brought in and controlled by the powerful leaders at the top who've been in charge for a long time. And then so in that way, just think about this. From the late 90s to today, we've gone through some incredibly traumatic events as a union. We had a failed merger attempt in the late 90s between SAG and AFTRA. Then we had the commercial strike of 2000 that many blame for teaching, the industry how to go overseas and shoot commercials, non-union, et cetera. Others will say that it saved, commercial Class A network, et cetera. Then you had the failed merger attempt in 2003 or 4. You had the breakdown with the Association of Talent Agents, where we lost the franchise agreement we had with the agencies for the first time since 1937. That happened in 2002, and we've never returned to the table with them since to try to get an arrangement with the agencies again, which allowed them to take over the industry, which is why the Writers Guild went and cleaned up our mess by pushing them back to where we had them in 2002. Then we had the strike of 2008, which led to the merger of SAG with AFTRA that was incredibly messy and traumatic. And so you had some of the same leaders in power that entire time, and they hate each other with like a Israeli-Palestinian passion, only it's worse because they at least have Mideast peace talks. There are no peace talks within our union between these warring factions. Now, these factions center around a group in Los Angeles called Membership First, which was kind of the pro-SAG group that was against the merger attempt in 2009. And then there's the pro-AFTRA group that prevailed in that battle because we had half of our board and the entire board of AFTRA overpower the SAG board that was opposed to the merger, at least under those terms. So you have a group called Unite for Strength that's LA based. Their New York counterpart is called USAN, or United Screen Actors Nationwide, and then something called Union Strong, which is the other 23 locals across in between New York and Los Angeles. So these two groups have been at it for years and years and years and years. But with the merger battle, one side, that UFS, Union Strong, USAN, party, have had monolithic control of SAG-AFTRA and SAG ever since 2009. So everything that's happened in our union since 2009 is a direct result of their leadership, because they face no opposition in the boardroom. And all power in our union is consolidated in the national boardroom. So whatever the national boardroom decides to do is what the rest of the union is subject to. Locals don't have much power. They are very subject to control by the national union. So, yeah, that would be my second thing, is like addressing the political divide within our union and getting rid of these toxic partisan politics that we have are what's keeping us dividing and conquering ourselves. And we're easy pickings for the employers to they know we don't have the solidarity to stand up to them in negotiations. So they've leaned on us to the point that being a middle-class actor is now effectively a thing of the past. You have the great masses of our members who are just trying to become a series regular. And even when you are a series regular, you're seeing lower paychecks than ever unless you're actually a star, which is not the same thing anymore, because you can be on a series and no one still knows who you are because there's 600 series a year out there, right? So it's only the stars who have the ability to really thrive in this environment. So we're basically back into like a lottery system where a few fortunate people can make a living in this industry. And so I would say the technology is one, the infighting that's crippling our union's behavior is number two. And I think the third most important one of them all, because this one actually helps solve everything, is union literacy. Now, when I joined SAG, I was never given an orientation. When SAG merged with AFTRA, I was never given an orientation. They're not mandatory, they never were. And what's worse is even when you do go in for an orientation, there's no standard. What you learn in the Atlanta local is what's different in the Seattle local, is different from the LA local, is different from the Missouri Valley local, because it's just decided by whoever volunteers to be on that committee and show up and teach. The staff have not created a standardized orientation to teach our members about our union's governance, our locals, our constitutions, our contracts, our member categories, our benefits, and the support companies like the foundation and the Actors Fund, Motion Picture TV Fund, our benefit plans. They don't teach us about our sister unions, guilds, and associations. So when we're on set, we know what's IATSE and Teamsters and CSA and PGA and LIUNA and IBEW and whatever. So like we don't learn any of that stuff. So it feels like when you join SAG-AFTRA that you just join Costco and you pay a couple $100 to be a part of it, and that you can just get maybe a better agent and you can maybe be taken more seriously and maybe you can get better auditions, but like you don't really know what it is you've just joined. And you would never walk around Costco and basically say, I should run this place. Unless someone tells you How would you know it's a member-run union? How would you know we not only want but need members to step forward to occupy committee positions and delegate positions and local board positions and like cycle out this old encrusted monolithic leadership structure that's kind of kept us in this place. So I think if you actually educated members on how their union works, and then they would actually participate more because they would know that they would feel qualified too. And we need to look no further than last year's vote on the TV theatrical contract that we had. That was such a sordid affair. I mean, the story about what happened with the last TV theatrical contract is truly a shocking story. That will go down in history. The net result of what came out of those negotiations was an abject failure and possibly an intentional throwing of a negotiation. And we'll talk about why that's the case. But what ended up coming to us was so unacceptable. Myself and a couple others decided we really wanted to fight for a minority report to be included in the referendum booklet. So basically what happens is when the national board approves a contract, it goes to the members to vote. And they're going to send the members a booklet called a referendum booklet, which basically is, here's what we negotiated in this contract. And so in 2014 and in 2017, we didn't get a minority report in that booklet, which means what are the arguments against voting for this contract? So here's all the pros, but what are the cons? We were never given the cons in the past. So in this one, we fought and somehow managed to Jedi mindfuck the national board to give us a minority report. Basically, we went in there asking for too much and they felt magnanimous giving us a really shitty one, but at least they gave us an in to have the conversation. So then after we got sent the contract to vote on as members, over the next month, there were online Zoom town halls and I don't know if Clubhouse was a thing yet, but there were all these conversations and meetings around, well, what is broadcast syndication? What are our streaming residual formulas? What is onerous exclusivity and options agreements that hold members back from working? What are the employer contribution caps for our pension and health plans? Or what is this thing about paying people residuals in their initial paychecks in advance? And what about, so you had all this robust discussion. And what ended up happening from all these people educating themselves and engaging in this, should I vote for it or not, or whatever, also fueled by the desperation of the leadership at the time to force a yes vote, where they literally only had a vote yes button on the page on the voting page of the website. So you didn't even have a button to vote no if you wanted to vote no. And then we called them out on it, and a day later they took that down. But we don't know how many members got those ballots and decided, oh, I guess I'm only supposed to vote if I want to vote yes. And so they never voted at all. We got not one, not two, not three, but 4 postcards asking us to vote yes. We got robocalled for the first time in our union's history from our president telling us to support the contract, and the most awkward interview of all time with Alec Baldwin about the contract. And so ultimately they achieved forcing a yes vote upon the membership. But we went from 16% of our members voting in 2014 to 15% voting on the contract in 2017. It went down 1% to 27.33% in last year's contract. That is 20,000 additional members voting on the contract that never had before. It's the greatest turnout of any election in our union's history, period. We've never gotten a 27% contract vote turnout. So that shows me that if you educate people, if you don't condescend to them, if you don't just try to tell them what to do, if you actually give them an opportunity to learn and participate, they will. And so we just need to do more of that. If we can educate our members about the union, they will participate more, they will feel more ownership, they will feel less intimidated. And so union literacy is one of my major concerns right now. That's why I created a group called Solidarity, which is this grassroots, education group. We created a union literacy guide, a website that is incredible, that has all that information on it. And basically we're creating tools for members to educate themselves in the absence of that kind of leadership from SAG-AFTRA National. So yeah, technology, get rid of the infighting, that's that toxic political party infighting, and union literacy. Those would be my 3 things.
This is the second part. What are 3 things that actors can do to make change?
The last page of the union literacy guide is a how to get involved page. It talks about the ways you can get involved. And essentially there are 4 different tiers that I've identified that you can get involved, okay? The very the very first one, the simplest one, is to be what I call an engaged member. An engaged member is I have a basic understanding of the union. I participate in the W&Ws, which are the meetings before we go into contract negotiations, where members can come and share their ideas for a better contract. So you can come to the theatrical W&Ws and say, why am I having to do all these crazy things for self-tapes? Can't we create some kind of industry standard to limit what productions can ask us for when they want us to self-tape for them? Otherwise, they're making me do all kinds of crazy things with props and editing and this technology, and having to go out and buy wardrobe, or I have to shoot this with someone else, but it's COVID, what the fuck is that about, and whatever. So it's like you can go and say that in a room where leaders are there to listen and hopefully go fight for that in negotiations. And so an engaged member will participate in those and vote. So those are the three kind of things that an engaged member would do. I'm knowledgeable, I participate in the W&Ws, and I vote on the things that come before me. That is kind of the first tier of participation. The second tier of participation is getting involved on a grassroots level. So that means not being part of an official committee or subcommittee or being on the board or being in leadership or something like that, but actually showing up to pro-union events that are SAG-AFTRA. So Solidarity is one. There's another one called Union Working. I'm sure there are others around the country, but this is members getting together with members to educate each other or affect change together or whatever. We've had people do that around the police unions in the AFL-CIO after the George Floyd thing happened, or we've had people organize around trying to turn things around with the health plan, or people trying to start petitions to address the lack of dues relief when people lost their jobs, when things. So getting involved in those things is grassroots efforts, members coming together to organize around an issue that they feel passionate about, with petitions or with groups or whatever. So that's the next level. The cool thing about the grassroots level is you can prove things out so that when you bring them to the union, they're not half-baked, they're actually ready to go. Because when you come to the union and say, why don't you guys do this? They're like, what's the plan? With who? With what resources? Who's going to run it? You're like, you can't just tell us you want this. Like, we work for you. What do you want us to do? So we started that with self-taping. We just started making our studio at the LA Conservatory available on its off hours to members who wanted to self-tape for free. We brought in and trained people to run the equipment and to read with them. And we helped hundreds of members self-tape for free in our studio on its off time. And then we proved it so well, it became an official program of the LA Conservatory with staff resources. And we even bought a whole new studio setup to help self-tape people for free. And we have it now available on the second floor at 5757 Wilshire. Same thing with the table reads. I just started doing table reads for writers that I knew, and before we knew it, it's now an official subcommittee of the LA local that does table reads with the Writers Guild and with some of these professional writing groups and platforms. So you can prove something out at a grassroots level that will then become adopted and part of the DNA of the local itself. The third level is to get involved in committee service. So that's actually, anybody who's a board or a SAG-AFTRA member on this call, you'll know that you get two different emails before every election. One of them is for local committees, the other is for national committees. And basically it says, let us know what committees you want to be a part of, and then tell us why and why you think you'd be qualified, et cetera. And then in theory, what you write will go to the people who are the chairs of those committees, and that you have a shot of being seated on those committees. What ends up happening really in reality is that unless you're friends with the chair or they know you, they're pretty much going to give those seats to the people that they already know and like. But if you're lucky to be in a local like LA, we actually have a culture now in the last couple of years of bringing in new people onto these committees to invite them into service. But the way to get on a committee is you have to really know somebody on the committee or the chair to get introduced, and then perhaps you can get engaged that way. So that's the third tier, is committee service. And then the last way I would say would be in leadership. And that could be running for delegate, convention delegate, running for a local board position, for a local officer position like president or vice president or secretary, national board position or national officer like the president or the secretary treasurer. So those are kind of the four tiers. When you're actually in leadership, you get to make decisions that affect the direction of the union, either on a local level or as a whole.
When negotiations happen, like who spearheads that? Who spearheads that for SAG-AFTRA when they go into negotiations on contracts? What is that group comprised of? Just out of curiosity, I don't think I know.
Yeah. So, and this will actually lead me into my fun story about our contract, which is we have two leadership structures in the union. The members are the union. SAG-AFTRA is the corporate structure that we've decided to establish, but we are the members of the union, the actual performers who pay dues and are out there. Like, we're the union, the unified community. But we pool our dues together and earnings together, and we hire staff, and we have this corporate structure with paid staff to do shit for us. So we have the member leadership that are all volunteers. Whether you're a delegate all the way up to president of the union, it is all volunteer work. There's no pay for being a member leader of the union. But if we do hire paid staff, and the top staff person is called the National Executive Director, who right now is David White and is about to become Duncan Crabtree Ireland. So we had about 600 staff before COVID. It's been reduced down to about 400 because of all the budget cuts and all the economic impact of the pandemic. But so that there's a whole hierarchy with different departments, about 23 departments of staff, that they are allocated to. So the negotiations come up every 3 years, say, for most contracts like the TV theatrical. And so that means that the president of the union is really the top person guiding the union, because even our top staff person, the national executive director, reports to the president, who's the member elected leader. So it is a partnership, though, between that national executive director and the president to chart the course forward, because the president needs the NED to manage the institution, while the president is supposed to handle the membership. So it is Gabrielle Carteris has been the president since Ken Howard died in 2015. So she has been the one to lead that strategy with her team or whatever. And then David White, who's been our national executive director, is called our chief negotiator and has been the main person on staff to drive the negotiation process under the priorities that are set by Gabrielle and the negotiating committee. Now, the negotiating committee is seated by the president, but it has to be approved by the national board. So in 2019, so now I'm going to get into the story because this will illustrate it just by telling you the story. So everybody buckle up, because this is going to sound like some I don't know, John Grisham type of shit or something. All right. So, but this is my lived experience. So just hear me out. So in 2019, there was an upcoming election for president. That summer, there was a really odd situation that took place, which was we ended up with a Netflix agreement. Now, all of our major contracts are negotiated with the employers. Netflix was the largest employer of our members at the time, and I think still continues to be. They are massive, pouring $17 billion into content this next year alone. So somehow, and all of our contracts with big employers need to be negotiated by member-led processes, member-led committees, et cetera. But we had a really bizarre national board meeting in July of 2019, where the staff came to us and said, so guys, we were meeting with Netflix over some stuff, and we just ended up negotiating a contract with them. We don't know how it happened, but we just ended up doing it. And we kind of have a last best and final offer from them, and we need to tell them our decision today, or they'll take it away from us and take it off the table. And I'm sorry, we only have 2 hours for you guys to look it over and talk about it, and then we have to make a decision and move on. And we're all sitting there being like, what the hell is going on here? So we get this thing presented to us, and there's tons of stuff in it that we're like, this doesn't make sense. Netflix just built a whole facility in New Mexico, and you've got no background coverage for background performers in this new facility. Like, that's a big oversight. And what about how you're handling the fact that they have the say of whether we can work for other employers or not, if we're even a recurring guest on their shows or what? So we're looking through this thing, and we are like, you have to vote on it. And if you don't vote on it, then this is going to go, if you vote no on it, it's going to go away, and we'll lose this opportunity and lose this leverage to use the Netflix agreement against the AMPTP, because it's all the networks and studios and then Netflix, and we can use them to play them off against each other and whatever. So we're like, well, clearly Gabrielle had the votes in the room because her group has controlled the union since 2009. So we really didn't have any, ability to stop it in the first place. But, it's like, okay, well, I would rather us have a contract with Netflix, and I would rather us have the leverage going into the negotiations. But then they did a really unexpected thing where they did not allow the members to vote on it. Now, in the Constitution, it says that any contract that is industry-wide or affects a significant portion of our membership needs to go to the members for a vote. no one can deny the Netflix agreement doesn't affect a significant portion of our membership and that it's not industry-wide. Of course it is. And also, if they're going to claim that it's going to give us leverage against the rest of the networks and studios, it certainly sounds significant to me in that respect. But they said, oh, it's not industry-wide. It doesn't affect a significant portion of our members, so the members don't need to vote on it. Well, so what they wanted to do is they wanted to rush it. Because if they would have sent it to the members, there would have been a whole 45 to 60-day process of sending the materials to the members, getting them to vote on it, et cetera. And that would put them into past the election period of like us getting the ballots and getting all these things. Well, Gabrielle, who had nothing to do with negotiating that contract, by the way, had already written her candidate statement claiming credit for the Netflix agreement before, 3 weeks before our national board meeting, because she was so sure the national board would acquiesce that she knew the future and basically pre-knew that she was going to be able to take credit for this successful Netflix agreement. Well, okay, so essentially what happens is we get this Netflix agreement shoved on us. Then another weird thing happens. She seats the negotiating committee a year in advance, which is bizarre because our contract wasn't going to be up for the main theatrical contract until 2020. But in the summer of 2019, ahead of the elections, she wanted to seat the negotiating committee early. And before the W&Ws, normally you would have those meetings where members can come in and give input, and you include as many of those people who showed up with good ideas in the negotiating committee because they cared, they showed up, they have good ideas, whatever. But she decided to seat it before the W&Ws while she still had control of the union in case she was voted out as president that fall. So she pre-seats the negotiating committee under the excuse that, well, we want the option to go first in the pattern, and it will give us more time to prepare for the negotiations. Okay, well, let's see if either of those things that holds any water. In terms of like preparing for the next negotiation, they met once and didn't meet for 8 months, and then they didn't even reprioritize after COVID hit when they were already going into the negotiations after COVID had hit. And so they were completely caught off guard by the priorities of the industry, and we suffered for it in negotiations. So that was not the reason. They did not use that time to meet and prepare. Number two is we want to go potentially first in the pattern. For those of you who don't know what the pattern is, it means usually the DGA goes and negotiates first, then the Writers Guild, and then SAG-AFTRA has to kind of acquiesce to whatever the other two agreed to. Because if it's good enough for the DGA and it's good enough for WGA, then it should be good enough for SAG-AFTRA. And we've fallen into this weird pattern for like the last 15 years where we just kind of go along with whatever has been established by the other sister unions. So they wanted the option to say, hey, if we can seat this early, maybe we go ahead of the DGA, maybe we go ahead of the WGA. Of course they didn't do that. They never had any intention of doing that. So she seated the negotiating committee early. Then she truncated the W&Ws down from 6 weeks to a week, meaning normally members would have the opportunity for 6 weeks to come in and share their feedback about this main film contract that we all dream of working. She reduced it down to 1 week. Why? Because there was a backroom meeting where I was present where they said, we don't need input from the members because we already know the 4 things we were going to fight and die on the Hill for in this negotiation. Number one, we need to increase the residuals for streaming content. Number two, we have to increase the employer contribution caps for our pension and health plans to keep them solvent. Number three, we need to eliminate the practice of advance payment of residuals in your paychecks. And number four is it was getting rid of these options and exclusivity agreements where members are on a short order series, like 6, 8 episodes, and yet they don't know if it's going to get picked up. They don't know if it's going to get renewed. And so they're sitting there dying on the vine for 2, sometimes 3 years, being paid a small pittance to be under contract. And they have to turn down all other jobs. And it keeps people locked up during their prime earning years. So these are the 4 things they were going to fight and die on the Hill for. So they didn't need member feedback is what they said. Well, we still had W&Ws. About 150 proposals came in across the country, and almost all of them were rejected. And it was whittled down to 10 proposals in the plenary where the negotiating committee gets together. And Gabrielle chose every single person on that negotiating committee, many of whom have no working experience in our contracts, and also doesn't include a representative of every work category that's affected by the contract. So you have people voting on like singer issues or dancer issues, and there's no even dancer representative on the negotiating committee. So of course they were ignored in the contract, right? So then we get into the election period, which was absolutely bizarre and nasty. And then we go, Gabrielle, wins because of a variety of reasons, but it was a shitty experience. But then we go into the actual negotiations. So now we're into March, April of 2020. They never met. They never reprioritized. They go into the negotiations. They come back from negotiations. They didn't get anything with options and exclusivity. They didn't get anything with increasing employer contribution caps to pension and health. They didn't get anything with advanced payment of residuals. And they didn't get anything for advertising video on demand, but they got an increase in streaming residuals, which is what they wanted, but they gave away broadcast syndication, which is, local networks and stations licensing to run old episodes of this series or that series, which is a big part of how 35,000 of our members make income from those types of shows in syndication. They gave that away, which resulted in a 40 to 90% reduction in income at a time when we knew that stuff that's already in the can is all that we're going to be able to see for the next year, because we're in a freaking pandemic and nobody can shoot anything. So why would you discount the income that we're counting on to survive the freaking pandemic? So we really didn't gain anything. We lost all this income for a little increase in streaming residuals, which is still not up to par with network television from when we fought for jurisdiction in 2014 for streaming. So we're still not getting paid as much as if it was on TV, and we didn't get anything else. And instead they had this bizarre thing of fighting and giving away negotiating proposals for nudity and sexual situations and intimate scenes protections, which shouldn't even be a negotiation. You go into the AMPTP and you say, this is protecting you from liability because you do not want somebody having an experience on your sets that opens you up to litigation and for a Me Too or Time's Up experience. And they wasted all of this time to come back with protections that were so unacceptable. Time's Up itself came out against the contract and said it's dangerous and unsatisfactory, and Time's Up SAG-AFTRA, we can't support this contract. Eva Longoria went on TV and said, don't support this contract. So that's how terrible our contract came back to us. And here's the kicker. Why would we do so poorly in that negotiation? Well, something else curious happened in the summer of 2019. Our national president was hired by the AMPTP production company Fox for a reboot of her series 90210, shot in Vancouver, not even in the United States. So a lot of non-union people were involved in the production of that show. And it was launched all of a hurry in the second week of August in the middle of our elections, where she plays a union president of an actors union in the show. And if you read the interviews with Jenny Garth and Tori Spelling, they were completely baffled why Fox came in to get the show, why they reduced it from a full 22 episode season down to 6, why they canceled it immediately after our elections by saying, oh, we thought of it as kind of a one-time deal. Well, how can you not see and she was also credited as an executive producer on that show. So you have the AMPTP, a major studio Fox, essentially hiring and employing our president while she's seating the negotiating committee that's going to negotiate against them in less than a year. And then they try to help her win the election by launching the show in the middle of the election, which as an executive producer, she could say, guys, it's actually against union policy for employers to try to influence union elections. You can't show this in the middle of our elections or it'll look like the AMPTP is trying to help her win, which of course they were. So one could say, she worked for them as an executive producer, as an actor. They tried to boost her profile by rebooting the only show people even ever knew her from. And then, of course, she won the election. They canceled the show. And the next negotiation goes poorly. And she goes in the frickin' paper in the Wrap and says, our members are so weak, they don't have the will to strike. So there's no better deal to be had. So we just have to accept whatever it is we've been given, which if you were a union president, to be in the press saying my union members are so weak, we don't have the will to fight, that should be like malpractice for a union president to say something like that. So if it looks like a duck, smells like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a fucking duck. And in my view, we had a compromised president who was bought off by our employers to throw the negotiations, and we got a shitty deal as a result of it. And they needed it to pass so badly that even after we fired 30% of our workforce, they spent $250,000 with 4 postcards, robocalls, a weird interview with Alec Baldwin, and not even giving us a vote no button on the website to force an outcome that they were probably, she promised to deliver to the AMPTP. So that's speculation, but everything I told you about the sequence of events, that's all true. So that's why that whole negotiation was a fucking bizarro land, weird thing to witness, and something most members have no idea about, no access to. How would they ever be aware of it. You're not in the back rooms. You're not seeing these deals. You're not being told this stuff. So yeah, that's the kind of shit that I'm talking about, that I stuck my finger into the socket and I've been buzzing ever since. And I'm like, we can do better here.
This is the okay. So I'm gonna make an allusion to sports,
Mm-hmm.
right? So back in the day, like the baseball union was garbage. Like it really didn't have any power because of the reserve clause that basically kept ball players tied to a team. Free agency didn't exist until the union hired Marvin Miller. He was an old union guy. Like that's what he did. He was an organizer and they hired him, and he didn't come at the owners like immediately. He in fact, Curt Flood took a case to the Supreme Court that he didn't win to be a free agent, right? And it destroyed his career. Never played baseball after, right? But Marvin Miller kind of bided his time. He was smart and he was wily, and he finally got to a point where a case did go before a judge, did go before the Supreme Court, that did allow for the players. It destroyed the reserve clause, and it introduced free agency. It's the thing that they had been wanting since the beginning of the major leagues, right? Mm-hmm. So this is my question. Is there somebody, I mean, like, is there somebody in the negotiating room who has those kinds of chops? It doesn't sound like it. Who can go toe to toe, like with the AMPTP negotiator? You know what I mean? Like, is the outgoing executive director, is that their role?
Yeah.
And are they up to the challenge?
Well, here's the thing, that David White chose to be the chief negotiating, the chief negotiator, and Gabrielle, and before that, Ken Howard acquiesced to him being the chief negotiator. But there are unions that will actually hire and bring in a negotiator to handle specific negotiations. There's no rule that says David White has to be the chief negotiator. Also, there's no rule that says Gabrielle has to be the chair of the negotiating committee. The national board could say, "Nuh-uh, we want to have somebody else who we think is going to lead that committee process better, be the chair of the negotiating committee." But the thing is, since we have all these pro-AFTRA local board members from around the country, combined with the remnants of the pro-merger SAG board that now make up kind of a 67, 68% versus the LA based, but kind of opposition, pro-SAG, pro-strength and negotiations kind of opposition group, they've been able to outvote us on everything for the last dozen years. So we effectively have no voice. So Gabrielle has the votes in the room. Everybody around the country owes UFS and USAN for saving their AFTRA locals. AFTRA was close to bankruptcy. They were insolvent. They were overstating their membership. They were in such bad financial straits. They had embezzlements. They weren't sending their checks out to their members on time. It was a disaster that they broke ranks with SAG to undercut us in negotiations to take 47% of the TV work away from SAG, which forced a merger in 2009. That's why there's so much bad blood, is because AFTRA was always supposed to negotiate hand in hand with SAG so they couldn't pit us off against each other. That's where some of that just enmity emanates from. So we can absolutely hire a professional negotiator or have a different negotiator come in. Right now, we don't have the kind of leadership that is interested in being tough in negotiations. We have the kind of leadership that wants to go along and get along and keep the town working no matter what it costs the lower end people, because all they're interested in is the highest earners to support them and endorse them come negotiate or come election time. So we have a union that is focused on serving the needs of those that don't even need the union because they don't work for scale. Stars don't work for scale. It is the rank and file aspirational performer that needs the protections of the union, not somebody with a diva rider and makes $2 million an episode for that's not what the union is for. But if you're trying to maintain power, you want to impress the most powerful and successful performers to keep you in office. And that's the cycle that we've been in for a long time. So to Jennifer's question, is there a way to come back from this? Absolutely. And the good news, it doesn't even have to take that long. As soon as you get a different majority in the national boardroom, and as soon as you get a different president in that sets the agenda, you can start to change things incredibly rapidly with just votes of the national board. And to have strength in negotiations, that's that's something that I can tell you, that this Membership First / myself / Jane Austen, if you want to consider her as an independent, she was with Membership First for 2 decades, and then she left them when she was pissed at them over running Matthew Modine in 2019. But like, she was the secretary treasurer for 4 years and the LA president for 4 years and a national board member for like 20. So she was able to get elected on her 20-year record of service to the union, even if she wasn't with the party. So I guess you could call her an independent. But I can tell you that our community is much more, I would say, oriented towards being strong and strategic in negotiations. But the only way to be able to be strong in negotiations, and which is why all that shit's called solidarity, is because unless you have the support of the members, you can't accomplish anything. Because if you're going to be strong in negotiations, you have to be able to look an employer in the eye and say, we will not come to work if you don't do this for us. And if you don't have the support of the members, you can't get a strike authorization voted up. And if you can't get a strike authorization voted up, you can't go on strike. So you have to have the will of the members behind you, and they can only support you if they feel like loyal to the union and feel well served and believe in the leadership and the way things are going. And my read on the membership right now is they couldn't be less satisfied with the way the union is going. We have casting directors and agents and managers and all kinds of professionals saying, why would you join the union? Just keep doing all this non-union work. Or what's the union doing for you? Resign and go financial core. Like, you have all these people out there just, delaying joining the union because like, oh, fuck, do I have to join the union? But I want to keep doing these short films and these web series and these like low budget films and whatever it is to build my resume, etc. As soon as I join the union, I can't do it. That's not even true. Right? This is one kind of big tidbit that I'll leave with you guys. Not leave with you guys, but not that we have to end, but I'm just saying, like, global rule 1 is the most fucked up, weird thing that I've been learning about in the last few months. I guess apart from the fact that we in our contracts, we're supposed to be paid for our auditions. And the second one is that we're supposed to have free workshop or free showcases and generals with CSA casting directors. Those are 2 sections of our contract we haven't been enforcing in many, many years. But I would say global rule 1 is one of the most misunderstood things, and it's for a very weird reason. I don't know if y'all heard this, but I heard this growing up, and especially as I started to qualify for joining the union, et cetera, that once you join the union, you can't work non-union, right? The union will also say, if you turn on a camera or turn on a microphone, you're in our jurisdiction, you need to be working under a union contract. But people are under the erroneous impression that when you join the union, you can't work non-union. Now, if you actually read what Global Rule 1 says, it says you cannot work non-union in a jurisdiction where we have a national collective bargaining agreement in place. Okay, so we have like 9 national collective bargaining agreements. The main theatrical and TV agreement applies to films that are 2 million in budget and above. So what did we create for 2 million and below? What's called promulgated contracts. That's the low budget agreement, the modified or the moderate low, the ultra low. Now we have the short project agreement, the micro budget agreement, and the student film agreement. We've got 6 lower budget agreements that weren't negotiated with anybody. They're not multi-employer national collective bargaining agreements. They're promulgated contracts. We just created them, and we want people to use them. Okay, but it's not a violation of Global Rule 1 if you work in those spaces and do something non-union. Now, that doesn't mean we want you to. As a union member, as a union leader, I want you to ask those producers to do it under a union contract so you get your pension and health contributions, so you have your turnaround, so you have your protections, all that. I want you to be safe and protected and compensated fairly. But it's not, you don't have to worry about being brought up on charges. You're not doing anything that goes against union rules to do a non-union low budget feature or a low budget web series or your friend's fucking passion project or whatever it is. But so many people are terrified that if they do that, they'll get kicked out of the union, they'll get brought up on charges or disciplined or fined. So the union has done a really good job of scaring our own members and the community, but not being open and honest and transparent about what the rules actually are. And so, and the other place where it's obvious is in broadcasting. Broadcasters are in our union, but why is MSNBC and CNN non-union? Well, what people don't understand is that broadcast stations don't have a national bargaining entity. Like The AMPTP represents all the studios and networks apart from Netflix. So we have an entity to negotiate with. The JPC represents all the signatory advertisers and advertising agencies. So we have an entity to negotiate with. They don't have that in the broadcasting world. So you basically have to go to station by station, to network and try to organize them under a union contract, which is why so many broadcast stations are non-union. So clearly in that jurisdiction, there are people working non-union if they get a job at a non-union broadcast station, even if they're a member. Same thing with audiobooks. Audiobooks are done publisher by publisher. So there's no national collective bargaining agreement for narrating audiobooks. It just depends on who you're working for. So when it comes to our lower budget contracts, it is not a violation to do those non-union, but I encourage people to try to convert those to union and to do them under union contracts. But our staff, they don't want to be caught saying that to people, because they don't ever want to do something that makes it seem like it's okay to do something non-union. So it's easier for staff to tell us, no, it always has to be union, because it doesn't affect them. They're not an artist looking at their friend and saying, sorry, dude, I can't do your web series, or sorry, I can't do your, like, it doesn't cost them anything to say no, no, no. But Lord knows how many of our, members have been affected by turning down paying jobs, great opportunities, because they wanted to be union loyal. For what? It wasn't even a thing. They didn't even have to do that. So that to me has been a real eye opener about, like, we need to have a union that is open and honest and transparent. And I believe in educating our members so that instead of just condescending to them and saying, no, 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 you say, how can I empower you to turn those things union? We're supposed to be organizing work, not discouraging work. That's the opposite of what a union is supposed to be doing.
So I know you've probably seen some of those questions in the chat box there, but do you have any aspirations to run for the big office? Is that something that you could even attain as an independent?
Yeah, well, so thank you, Allison, for asking the question. The answer is, here's how I've always answered that question. Like, I will do whatever best serves the union. If I'm the right guy for something, people will let me know that, and then it'll be obvious to everybody that that's the place that I should serve. I don't think I'm the best person for the job, to me, because I would want somebody like Oprah or like The Rock or like somebody like, I don't know, like, Viola Davis, or, somebody who can sit across from the AMPTP and is completely invulnerable to attack. You can't hurt my career. I have the love and support of America behind me, not just the members behind me. So if you fuck with me, if you don't treat our members right, you're going to be in a world of PR pain, and we probably are going to be able to strike against you because people will have my back. Like, you want a real fucking star to go up against those people in that position. Whereas for me, I'm still an aspirational performer. I'm on my first series. We're in our second season, but it's a smaller show that's an independent series about Jesus and his disciples called The Chosen. I've worked on about 40 different network shows. I've done about 40 different commercial campaigns. I'm a working actor, but I'm a blue collar, like, in the trenches guy. I'm not a celebrity or a star. So I may be really useful as an advisor, as a board member, as a local president, as a local whatever. But as far as the president of the union, I would want somebody who is that kind of star power to bring that prestige back to those negotiations and make them, quake in their boots. So maybe someday I'll attain the kind of level of success that makes sense. Or maybe someday I'll have the love and support of enough members where I'm just the right guy to do something like that. I endeavor to just be valuable, and the chips will fall where they may. But again, serving as the president is volunteer. It's not like I got a ton of other shit I would love to do and create art in my life to serve as the president. But if I'm the right guy to help with something, I just like solving problems. So right now I'm having the time of my life just building relationships with people I used to watch growing up on TV and in movies. Like somebody who's become like a brother from another mother to me, which I never would have met if it wasn't for union service, is Sean Astin. I grew up watching him as Samwise and Lord of the Rings and The Goonies and all this. And now we're up till 4 a.m. working on union shit together, like 2-3 nights a week and whatever. Like, he's become like family to me. And that's so fun. It's so fun to meet these people, like Patricia Richardson, our LA president. Yeah. How many times did I watch Home Improvement coming home and like laugh my ass off? JTT is like another bro to me. Like, we hang out and whatever. It's like, all of my girlfriends had his fucking picture on their wall growing up, like from Tiger Beat magazine. Like, so it's really bizarre to, like, just by wanting to be of service to my union, it has expanded my network and my relationships beyond anything I think I could have just done, just being out there working as a performer.
How about we open it up for a couple questions if anybody
That's
wants
great,
to ask anything?
yeah, because I would love to answer a couple of questions, and then I've got a dinner at 8:45 that I'm going to run to.
Okay, so just 2 questions. So
that's fine, and don't feel rushed. Don't feel rushed. It's only 16 minutes there, so I've got to leave in 20 minutes or something.
Okay, great. So Sharon's got her hand up, so you can unmute yourself, Sharon.
Okay.
The first.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much. That was not only incredibly eye-opening, but I really appreciate your passion and the service that you're doing for all of us as SAG-AFTRA members. So thank you very much. It's very inspiring. I want to know that since we have this terrible contract with the streamers, in 2 years, will it be up again, and can we renew it? And is there hope that we can actually salvage some decent contract in the future?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, anything that we've lost, even these changes to the health plan, which are absolutely criminal. I mean, the idea that somebody like Ed Asner, who was president of the union, who gave up all of his pre-1960s residuals to establish the fucking health plan that would kick him off at 92 years of age because he can't use his residuals to count towards earning for his, secondary health insurance. Well, how the fuck do you do that to somebody?
I know.
And they kicked 8,200 seniors off of our health plan by not allowing their residuals to count. These are people that paid into the plan their entire fucking lives. No. I mean, what do you have to do for a union to, like, have them hold up their end of the bargain to you? But the fact that we've had the qualifying thresholds go up, the benefits go down, the premiums go up, all that, we can always negotiate that back if we've got the will. We established it in the first place, didn't we? But it came at the cost of a strike and some pretty hefty, negotiation. I think Ronald Reagan was the president of the time that, established the pension and the health plan during his administration. So yeah, we can absolutely get things right with the streamers. They've been just feasting off of our art form over the last few years with, eliminating our billing. What used to be a guest is now a co-star. They don't want to pay you your quotes. They don't want to pay you anything more than, scale or break top a show. Like, it's like, they don't want to pay you for consecutive days of employment. They only want to pay you for the days you're on set. It's like, they don't give a fuck. They don't want this to be a sustainable living for you. They just want desperate bodies that can stand where they want and say what they want when they want them to say it. So we can absolutely fight back all of these things. We just have to have the expertise and the will and the solidarity to do it.
That's great. That's very inspiring too, because it really feels like then that if one is motivated and one puts boots on the ground and, gets the elbows, then you can actually make change, which is great. Because to have this, the level of exploitation that's happening when the streamers are shoving their pockets full of cash is really offensive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, Shaan was mentioning just the negotiations and particularly with the Netflix negotiation. And it begs the question, is it so egregious in nature due to the fact that the level of incompetence or, being complicit? And it begs the question, lawyers go to law school for 3 years, particularly to negotiate contracts. People are in business that specialize in negotiating contracts. Is that something that, moving forward is going to be something that's looked upon in terms of, having someone appointed for these negotiations? Or is
David White's an attorney? Duncan Crabtree Island is an attorney. But, that doesn't mean that they are good negotiators, and so and they're also employees. It's not up to David White what we fight for. It's up to the members who are on that negotiating committee that are chosen by the president. And then the employees can voice their objections. I guess it depends on the culture of whether they're afraid for their jobs and don't want to speak up in opposition to the president. But if we have a healthy functioning leadership, then they should be able to voice their objections, but the final decision is the members. We're the ones that run this fucking union. It's our union. We're the ones who pay their salaries, right? So it really is all a reflection of the leadership of the member side, not of the staff side. Because you could even have a bad negotiator and say, yeah, go in there, pee your pants, but this is what you're going to ask for, So I don't lay the fault at our staff's feet, but I think not having stronger staff and more sophisticated staff makes things worse.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Logan, you're up. And then I think we'll wrap it up after Logan, okay?
Yeah, awesome, Brian. This has been so much fun. Thank you, guys. I almost never get a chance to share my actual opinions because I'm always in environments where we want to try to not be political or not be too. But then when Brian reached out to me, especially under the context of having read my letter, I'm like, okay, well, now I can say whatever the fuck it is I have on my heart.
Guys, just so you know, I mean, like, I told Shaan that I would send him, this so he could have kind of final approval. And he basically said, I don't give a shit. Just so, whereas in the past I've done just highlights of the roundtable, this one I'm putting up full because I think this is probably the most important roundtable that we've had to this point.
Oh, that's awesome. That's fun to
No,
hear.
I'm not blowing smoke. It's something that's needed. And what I need you guys to do, please, is I need you to like spread the word, not just about the channel, but about this roundtable. This is important. This is it. I always say this, right? Change happens from the ground up. It starts with you guys. So we have to spread the word. Shaan has been a pretty lone fucking voice in this thing. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's pretty incredible about I'll just share this kind of thing with you guys since you've been so kind to stick around for all this time and hear me talk about this. I have been very assertive in my letters, and I put the links in the chat if you guys want to read any of them, or some of them I've recorded as audio versions so you can hear me in case you don't want to read it all. But I have been called every name in the book. I had the ruling regime take out a Facebook ad pointing to a page on their website calling me a traitor to my race, a hypocrite, a race baiter, a brown lackey, a bully, a narcissist, a misogynist. It's this, like every character. I mean, when you don't have an argument, all you have left is character assassination, right? So they didn't address any of the points that I raised, any of the issues that I brought to light. They just wanted to destroy my credibility amongst the members. What they didn't expect is that I've personally interacted with and trained and spoken with and helped thousands of members who know me personally. So they know my heart. So they know what they're seeing is simply because they don't have an argument. So what did they do in 2019? When I put out my 2019 letter, they voted almost the entire party of the ruling regime out of LA leadership. And I was the 14th highest elected member in the union. And so that to me shows that the members value truth, the honesty, courage. And now I feel so protected about speaking out because I know I can speak my truth and the members have my back. And that makes me even more able to speak because they can't cut me down with those personal attacks. At a certain point, they have to engage with the ideas, with the topics, with the issues. And that's when the fun really begins, because I can't wait to know that I'm wrong about something by having a really stimulating conversation. But if you're just going to keep calling me an asshole but never debate with me, then I'm kind of not convinced by your argument. I'm going to continue to, have my opinion. So yeah, I've been attacked mercilessly. They just banned all casting professionals from serving in leadership, and it was targeted to try to block me. They don't know I haven't worked in session directing for over 2 years, so they shot at me and they hit Brian and the rest of the casting community with that prohibition. But this is the kind of shit that we're up against, where they'll resort to every tactic except actually debating something. It's like they would rather fire rockets at each other than have the Mideast peace talks, And so anyway, yeah, thank you. If anybody wants to hear what I've read, it has been kind of a lone wolf situation, but what I found is it only takes one to kind of break through and create a space for others to enter into it as well. So I see more people finding the courage to speak up. You'd be amazed how many people I've had ask me, like, weren't you afraid that this would hurt your career? And I was like, if I was a stunt performer, I would be afraid that my fellow union brothers and sisters who are stunt coordinators might discriminate against me and not hire me for speaking up. If I was a singer, I would be afraid that my brothers and sisters who are vocal contractors would not hire me and I would suffer. If I was a dancer, I would be afraid that choreographers who are also my union brothers and sisters would discriminate against me and not hire me. if I was somebody who did looping and wallet groups, I would be afraid that the ADR coordinators who were my brothers and sisters would not hire me. But Gabrielle doesn't fucking hire me. None of her other people. It's the casting community and the writers and the directors at the WGA and the DGA. They're the ones who have to hire me. So I don't need to worry that they're going to hurt my career. Now, if I was in a smaller local where there's only one or two casting directors in town and they're really good friends with these established monolithic party leaders going back decades, we have absolute anecdotal and testimonial of evidence of people's careers being destroyed because they spoke up against their local leadership. But in LA, we have how many casting directors, Brian? 300, 400 casting directors. So
Growing by the day.
you know, so Gabrielle is welcome to try calling all 400 and hope it doesn't leak it to the press that she's trying to destroy a member's career for speaking out. I mean, it would be a gift if she were to do that, or somebody would to do that, because it would crack this whole fucking thing wide open. Like, that's how bad it is, that just by saying, hey, you missed something, they try to fucking kill your career. Like, what kind of shit is that?
With that said, Logan, you're wrapping us up, right?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is great, Shaan. I mean, this has just been like, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. But yeah, it's just, you know, the one thing I wanted to say was about the information. You talked about the lack of information, the lack of awareness. Like, I'm one credit away from a must join. Okay. And I think I was talking to Brian about this, but it might've been somebody else. But even just that aspect of it, what happens when you join, what is like, you just don't, there's so much information you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And you're so confused, and it kind of feels like there's like this like stuff that's in the dark, like on purpose. I don't know, like you've even said, maybe even on purpose or something, things like that, just to be like confuse your members. But my question about that is like, do you feel like reading the literature with solidarity, or looking at, I mean, do you feel like the SAG-AFTRA website helps? Like, what's the best way to kind of get, you know, become aware and actually get the information?
Well, I've been serving for 5 years as a volunteer in the union. And just in this last year, do I feel like I know a baseline of information about the union that I'm a part of and that I help to lead. There's so much to know. And I've been involved like a psycho, like, you know, 40 hours a week, fucking just at it. So it's not something you can digest in one sitting. It's something that's going to take some time. So it's one of those things where don't let the overwhelm of everything you need to know discourage you from learning just one thing. And the Union Literacy Guide, to me, is the orientation material we always should have gotten before we joined the union and after we joined the union. So that Union Literacy Guide is 124 colorful slides that I tried to make really interesting and colorful and cool and simplified. So if I did my job, it'll be kind of fun to look through it and click through it and look at everything. It'll make it super simple. So I think that Union Literacy Guide would be a great step in that direction. And then when you look at the SAG-AFTRA website, you'll understand it a lot more, because the SAG-AFTRA website isn't set up to teach you how everything works. It's just there to be a repository of information. And it's not even very well laid out, where people are constantly complaining that it's hard to find shit on that website. But on the Union Literacy Guide and on the Solidarity website, we've simplified all that shit and made it like intuitive. So I would start there. I think, you know, you guys have heard what I've said today. Those letters that I put in the chat will also add additional context to what I've said and give you more insight. But here's one thing I'll say to you, Logan. If you're illiterate, you're dependent on those who can read to tell you what's what. When you are literate, you are self-sufficient and can make sense of things on your own. So you always have to ask yourself, whose benefit is it that we are so illiterate when it comes to our union?
It's a great point. And thank you, yeah, for the resources you've provided. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for listening.